so it's not open. But we are going towards the rise of cyber Satan. And so we are going towards a moment in which even us as human beings will be surpassed by AI, which in 10 years' time, one AI will be capable of all the faults of mankind in one single computer. Imagine that. And be capable of reasoning and multiplying even the possibility that we have of expanding our knowledge through the AI if we make a correct use of it. Because today, the Jesuits, for example, are saying, use the AI, but don't use it to write your essay. Rather, use the AI to find the books you need for that essay, to find the material you need for your research. Unfortunately, then you have the majority of kids today say, geez, damn, I'm just going to get the AI to write the whole thing. I can't be bothered. This is going to take me too long.
Welcome back, everybody. We're welcoming for the first time Leo Zagami. Leo, how you doing, brother?
Great. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to meet you both, fellow Californians. We will be discussing a lot of interesting topics today. So I guess your audience will have a great show.
Thank you for joining us. We found out about you from our friend Christian White's show. We also listen to your podcast. Also, we want to start this out by talking about something you talked about on your podcast recently with Peter Thiel, dialogue. We'd like to go a little bit deeper into it. This is something we've been talking about also. We actually wrote an article on this probably,
5 months ago. We wrote about dialogue and like how it's like a tech Bilderberg and like how even Rand Paul has been a part of it. You name it, like Massey has been a part of his groups. All the politicians, the people who they have faith in are all involved in this Silicon Valley tech.
Massey's one that we haven't really seen him involved in dialogue, but we've seen other names like Ron Paul. We saw him on there. We saw Rand Paul on the list to be a dialogue. So this is like a Bilderberg and like WEF type thing. And basically it's what we believe is it's leading into a dark enlightenment type thing, which is what you talked about on your podcast.
The idea was actually discussed also in an email that appeared in the Epstein files. The idea that Peter Thiel wanted to constitute some kind of secret society appeared even appealing for Epstein, who discussed it to some extent with Peter Thiel. Like I explain in my latest book, Reason for Frankie Smoltz. I don't know if you have read this book, but it's very important to understand the history of the family of Peter Thiel, because Peter Thiel comes from Frankfurt. Now, Frankfurt is the banking stronghold of the Sabbatean Frankists. In fact, that's also the headquarters for the European Central Bank. And it is there that Jacob Frank, who was this Jewish heretic who claimed to be the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi, he directed the future banking cartel of the Rothschilds and so on in his court, which was based in Offenbach, in the outskirts of Frankfurt. Peter Thiel's connection to somebody like Epstein, whose family has really not being discussed enough in the media. There should be a whole documentary of the History Channel about it. But I think that because they have been so influential, having a guy like Jeffrey Epstein was probably a black sheep of the family compared to their past. They come from a family who had a lot of influence in Poland. They established the first private banking business in the Austro-Hungaric Empire. They came to become in charge of the national bank. The Epstein family has even an important building in the center of Vienna to this day called the Epstein Palace. So while we usually hear, even Epstein himself, when he gave the interview to Steve Bannon, not really revealing that. Steve Bannon, how did a schmuck like you from Brooklyn get to become a member of the Trilateral Commission? It's unthinkable if you're not in a bloodline to do what he has done. And so to actually then finally have this confirmation within the emails, especially the ones he exchanged with people like Ariane de Rothschild, for example, or other. There is the one with Ariane de Rothschild that is particularly revealing because he clearly says, we are from the banking family that made that Epstein Palace. We, the Gutmans, also helped a young Adolf Hitler when he was simply an artist. And these references, though, are constant in the Epstein saga. Fixation with bloodline, with social status and even DNA. This is a guy who ordered a bunch of DNA kits to just have them available all the time. He was conscious of the fact that power is restricted to certain families. And so he became even the guy who 10 years ago got the two fighting branches of the Rothschild to come back together and make peace. And he got from Marianne de Rothschild 25 million for that, aside from being a direct advisor to the Edmond de Rothschild Bank, whose CEO now is going to be in charge of the Vatican Bank. So all these things are rarely discussed in these terms, and unfortunately with this current situation of great distraction imposed to us by the war, the Epstein files have always been pushed aside now by the current administration for obvious reasons. So now we have even who had to pay the price. It's pretty clear that the whole thing with her saying, "I have the risk on the..." It was a great deception that was played, unfortunately, on the American people. In regards to Epstein and the Sabbatean Frankists, the Asiatic Brethren had a very interesting group. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
Asiatic League, yeah.
The Asiatic Brethren were the first Freemason, first Masonic order to let the Jews inside their lodges. But at the same time, the son of the cousin of Jacob Frank, Moses Dobruska, who then himself changed name a couple of times and became officially a Catholic like many Sabbatean Frankists, but he pushed inside this order all the teachings. And at the same time, the Asiatic Brethren was born out of a milieu and a group of people that were heavily involved with the activities of the Golden Rose Cross, the Order of the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt. And so there is then this reoccurring degree system that we find in the Golden Dawn, we find in the Società Rosicruciana in Anglia, which is actually derived directly from Germany. In fact, the Golden Dawn claimed a direct lineage to some mysterious figure with this cipher. In reality, it was a Sabbatean Frankist figure. Of course, there is been a heavy influence by the Sabbatean Frankists, who people from your show might not know, but have a Jewish sect that doesn't respect the Mosaic laws or the traditions of Judaism, but does the opposite of everything, all the Jewish precepts. And they do it in order to bring around, they claim, a messianic era that embraces values, though, that are completely contrary to our values. The values of the West have been built on the traditional Judeo-Christian approach. Then something changed with the French Revolution. And in fact, there is a direct involvement of the Sabbatean Frankists in the French Revolution with this Moses Dobruska, because he was involved in La Philosophie Sociale, which was an important element of the social transformation that led to the liberté, égalité, and fraternité. Everybody says liberté, égalité, fraternité, and that is the base today of the France, of the République Française, thinking that we are all the same. In reality, even that saying should be interpreted in an initiatic way, because it's liberty if you are free, of course. Equality, though, it was interpreted within the lodges of Freemasonry as only between people of the same degree. In the fraternity, only if you were, of course, involved in Freemasonry, which in France still to this day is so popular and so influential. In regards to the word occultism, we know that it sprang out of Eliphas Levi. Eliphas Levi was the guy who popularized this name, occultism. But even Eliphas Levi, who used to be a Catholic, he was Abbot almost. He was basically somebody who was in the clergy of the Catholic Church, who then left the Catholic Church altogether to become a sort of occultist/socialist. But he was influenced, his mentor was a Sabbatean Frankist from Poland. And when I say Sabbatean Frankist, I say Sabbatean Frankist whose Sabbatean Frankism is asserted. It's not simply ventilated, but it's asserted. So then his name was Eliphas Levi, suddenly. Eliphas Levi, though, is the guy who a lot of the people from even the modern Rosicrucian groups tend to study with great respect. But even the Freemasons, if you think about it, Albert Pike based his dogmas and rituals on the dogmas and rituals of high magic of Eliphas Levi. So the figure of Eliphas Levi, born Alphonse Louis Costin, who was a writer, his books are still to this day very influential. And he was initially pursuing this career in the Catholic Church. Then he abandoned the priesthood to become a ceremonial magician. And then he took this Jewish name, but nobody really talks about his background and why he took a Jewish name. And nobody talks about the links with the Sabbatean Frankists. He was also the guy linked with the early days of what then manifested as the Società Rosicruciana in Anglia, William Butler Lytton, and the creator of very important books. And of course, the myth of the Vril, which is also very important. So I think that people, Edward Bulwer Lytton, called Eliphas Levi, guested him in London, and actually got him to do an evocation to show that he was capable of evoking something. And apparently, he evoked Apollonius of Tyana, which then became the basis for then the successive birth of the Società Rosicruciana in Anglia. But let's remember that it was also the middle of the 1850s when Spiritism was starting now with Allan Kardec then taking off, and Spiritism was very popular. The Ouija board, rather than other techniques, were starting to surface. And so I think that it was an era, the period, the 19th century, in which we see gradually the rise of a highly industrialized, a society that starts to be industrialized, the Industrial Revolution. But at the same time, there was paradoxically part of our society that was rejecting elements of reason and embracing the ones of unreason, and often falling into the hands of charlatans that claim to talk with the spirits and all kinds of things. So there is definitely this interesting element. Then in 1875, you have the birth of the Theosophical Society, and that is another important element connected to the Sabbatean Frankists, because, like I explained in my book, Madame Blavatsky's mentor was this gentleman called Max Theon, who was a Polish Sabbatean Frankist. The Sabbatean Frankists were particularly relevant in Poland, aside from side parts of Ukraine and other. This heresy had spread like wildfire, and unfortunately it affected all the Orthodox Jewish community. To this day, the effect of their revolution, when people didn't really embrace their religion, they still managed to push for the secularization of Judaism and became part of what is known as the Jewish Enlightenment, which also, in a way, pushed towards what we have today in Judaism, which is 80% of Judaism embraces Reform Judaism, progressive Judaism, which is a wishy-washy version of the Mosaic laws, let's say. However, I leave it to you to give me the next question, otherwise I take...
I didn't know that Eliphas Levi was part of the Sabbatean Frankists. I've read a few of his books. I've read Yeah, I did not know that he was a part of. Did not know that he even influenced the one that wrote the three world wars.
Over Pike.
Yeah, I didn't even know that either.
If you want, I can give you some more specifications about it, because he was born in 1810, as we know, died in 1875, which is in fact the year the Theosophical Society was established, also by not only by Madame Blavatsky, but also by a person who was associated very closely to him until the last years of his life. So there was a direct connection there. But his mentor was the Sabbatean Frankist Joseph Maria One Wronski. He was the guy who introduced Eliphas Levi to occultism. And this is not like conspiracy theories. I base my work on, when I do book like this, knowing the criticism of this opera, the fact that you are dealing with things that, of course, can also upset people when you are digging into the roots of Christian Zionism, but not in a generalistic way, or you're digging into the roots of the present problems regarding Jeffrey Epstein. You need to have, you need to be really strict with yourself, even when it comes down to your sources and cross-referencing everything, to make sure that you are bringing a product which is credible. Because this book, for example, is appreciated by a lot of Orthodox Jews who are critical of the Sabbatean Frankists, who are critical of groups like Chabad Lubavitch, which are also have been unfortunately infiltrated. So I tend to be a little bit now. David Aziza received his PhD from the Columbia University. He's a very good academic, has made some great research on this influential poet, also called the Polish poet called Adam Mickiewicz. And basically he is mentioned in relation to the Frankists, and is clearly mentioned. And so the fact that Mickiewicz confirms that Wronski, Eliphas Levi's mentor, was part of the Sabbateans, it's not, I repeat, simply a theory. It's a fact that we can find from credible sources. So it's then when you actually start seeing what Eliphas Levi was teaching in his book, because I actually studied every single book of Eliphas Levi, starting when I was a kid, because I had them in my father's library. So I have still to this day a bunch of Eliphas Levi's books here that I can show you, and that I regard as very important for my own formation, esoterically speaking, magically speaking. Let's not forget Aleister Crowley claimed to be the reincarnation of Eliphas Levi himself, because he was then born in 1875. But Eliphas Levi, basically, Eliphas Levi's mentor, Wronski, was particularly known as having, because then you had Polish emigres in Paris, and there was this opportunity for Eliphas Levi to get in contact with this whole reality. So then he embraced, Eliphas Levi, the redemption through sin concept of the Sabbatean Frankists. And not happy with being simply, usually the Sabbateans are the ones who embrace other religions, like the Sabbateans embrace Islam, and then the Sabbatean Frankists embrace Catholicism, and they brought to the Catholic Church 20,000 Jewish converts. On the contrary, Eliphas Levi wanted to embrace the Sabbatean Frankists and even claim a Jewish name, Eliphas Levi, which of course even the surname Levi is a particular surname, because we know the connection of the Levis with the priesthood, the holy priesthood in Judaism. So the evidence Eliphas Levi's Frankist believes in his writings also are pretty obvious. The fact that I have discussed them extensively in my book, so if you are interested, of course, in going deeper into this, we can discuss it, but fundamentally, the metaphysical principles that Levi was pushing, even the Kabbalistic principle he was pushing.
Yeah.
When you suddenly have all this interest in Kabbalah in the 19th century spreading left and center through various secret societies, including, for example, the Golden Dawn, but it can be, like we said, the Asiatic Brethren was apparently directly linked to the birth of the Golden Dawn, but it was actually directly linked also to the birth of the Ordo Templi Orientis, which then, of course, then recognized Aleister Crowley as a high initiate, and then Crowley in the 1920s took over the OTO. It wasn't his creature to start with, though today the Ordo Templi Orientis here in California times claims the contrary, but because they were in the 70s, what happened was that for the first time here in California, in Berkeley, they created a Grand Lodge of the OTO. And it had never been done in that way, in that formal way, especially since there was various national representatives at the time of Crowley, but they were all more or less had been recruited within the Theosophical milieu, because that was the prevailing organization of the time, Theosophy, especially because Theosophy went hand in hand with the expansion and power of the British Empire that, of course, after the Second World War collapsed. And today we have here in California the leftovers of the New Age experiment that started in Switzerland and then developed here in California. People like Aldous Huxley then moved, of course, here in America, and they were very important, not only for, but let's not forget, Aldous Huxley was initiated by Crowley into the Golden Dawn in Berlin, initiated into the use of certain drugs. He opened his doors of perception before he even wrote the doors of perceptions. And so it's all interconnected if you think about it. Now then you have Jim Morris with his father who had a military background, then him, the doors, based on the doors of perception. But let's not forget, in volume 11 of my Confessions, which is a book I dedicate to mind control, and let's not forget that Huxley had a role in MK Ultra. MK Ultra was something that for 20 years, 50, it existed with other names before 1953, but ultimately when it was formalized as MK Ultra from 1953 to 1973, it was here in California, especially Northern California, San Francisco, but also in Southern California at times, these experiments were taking place. Experiments that, of course, we have also all the MK Ultra experiments done in Canada, which probably were the ones that they couldn't conduct here because they always have to have plausible deniability, the government, when they conduct this kind of operations. Anyway, the fact that mind control and magic go hand in hand, or that mind control goes hand in hand also with sectarian activities, because let's not forget that when you join certain groups and you get initiated, at times that initiation is a form of mental coercion and manipulation. Aside from the magical element, they can tell you, I'm opening this chakra, this other chakra with this initiation, or you are simply going to a lodge of Freemasons and they tell you, you go through this degree, and it's simply, you go through the motions, and the Freemasons at times don't even know what they're doing when they're doing that initiation. Most Freemasons, and even their worshipful master or the people in the lodges, don't know that doing that ritual in that specific way, going around the lodge in a specific way rather than the other way, is all part of an esoteric teachings, which also has inevitably an alchemical or magical background.
So I'm reading this book right now it's called The Reader, Pascal
Beverly Randall.
Sure. Another guy which I've cited because in my book, and there is a specific reason for that, because he's the guy who brought sexual magic here to the United States. Okay.
No, yeah.
In a way, there is two organizations that really inspired the birth of the OTO. One is the Asiatic Brethren, which is formally known in the foundation documents of the OTO as the Asiatic Brethren. But then you have also another group, the Frater Lucis. You have basically this reoccurring theme that brings us to the fact that, of course, Pascal Beverly Randolph connected also with Abraham Lincoln with the Spiritism, even in the White House, who was a guy who had a great influence. Aside from his magical potion and hashish smoking and all the rest. But Pascal Beverly Randolph creates the first Rosicrucian order here in America, formally. I'm not saying that Rosicrucian probably didn't exist before that, because obviously Rosicrucian is much older. But the first order to be founded with Pascal Beverly Randolph, aside from which today, the thing is that today there is those who embrace the sexual magic of Beverly Randolph and those who completely put aside the sexual magical element behind Pascal Beverly Randolph. Pascal Beverly Randolph, who himself wasn't a white man, by the way, as we all know. So this element, another race element, but also the element of magic that brings us back to the roots of animism, Africa, that then goes filtering through Santo Domingo, through Haiti, and then mixes with Freemasonry. It's like a cocktail, and you shake it all up, and then you bring it back here. And it actually constitutes even the basis of the ancient and accepted Scottish. So there is, I say that everything is a thread that connects all these realities within the Western initiatic system. And
so would Dion Fortune be a part of that also? Because reading one of her books also, Mystical Kabbalah. So I'm wondering if that's part of it.
The Fortune was, of course, part of the Golden Dawn. Then she broke up, created the Servants of Light. She is definitely somebody who's very knowledgeable, especially appreciate her attempt to formalize and define and create a manual for psychic self-defense, which is really an important element when you are within this milieu of magicians, esoteric people, is that you will inevitably cross the path with somebody who dislikes you, and you will inevitably fall in some kind of magical war. So, and that is just superficial, of course, but it happens. And it happens at an even more profound level when psychic powers are used from an egregor, because the concept also of the egregor is very important here. Concept that was embraced.
Mark Savage, yeah. Mark Savage talks about that, the egregor.
He embraced it, but the concept is much older than him. And we go back also to Eliphas Levi. And the fact that the thought form, that we create in a lodge, in a group of people, it then generates almost a metaphysical creature of sorts, which can be negative or can be positive. I'm not saying that all the egregors are positive or all the egregors are negative, because egregors can be created simply with one or more people start thinking about something. An egregor can be unconsciously created even in a concert when you are watching, I don't know, an artist on stage and everybody's unified by singing the same song and dancing to the same rhythm, even in a club. So it's very important to understand that. The egregor concept is very important for Freemasonry, as we all know, but it's very important for all those people who like Helena Blavatsky and many others. Rudolf Steiner, for example, who then created his own anthroposophical thing. He came out of the theosophical milieu disgusted about what he was seeing, especially when Crowley then took hold of the Egyptian rites, because through John Yarker, who was this guy who was doing a lot of French Freemasonry activity. And apparently he then rejected theosophy to then embrace his own thing, because he thought, first of all, that a Rosicrucian ideal was a Western ideal that couldn't be mixed too much with all those Asian or Indian, Hindu, Buddhist or whatever things that coming from the East through the theosophical societies were not always compatible with the Christianity, let's say. That was the idea, I think, that mostly moved Steiner's idealism and distancing, because he was influenced mostly by what we can define as Christian Gnosticism. Okay? Now, the problem here, I think, in what we can, in all this situation of spiritual science, was that within Freemasonry and the Illuminati, they were always pushing this belief that real Christianity wasn't what we really have, but the real Christianity is the one that we find in the Gnostic writings, or maybe in other teachings. The essence, they are not Gnostics. When there is a bit of confusion with the essence, because they always ascribed it. Even Madame Blavatsky was saying, put them all in one big, let's put the essence, the mythical, legendary teachers of Jesus, who apparently, after Good Friday, what we now call Good Friday, went there and revived him and then brought him elsewhere, like some say to India or Kashmir, where apparently there is a burial ground. And this whole thing goes back to the Theosophical Society. The Theosophical Society, I think, was really the most revolutionary organization, intellectually speaking, because without it, we will not have most of modern esotericism, and most of the organizations, even the Rosicrucian organizations that sprang out, that came out, and I'm not only talking about Amor, which necessarily, we all know the history of Amor comes from the roots that are in France, and they are connected directly with Count Cagliostro. Count Cagliostro himself was connected to Comte de Saint-Germain. We're talking about the whole system that was brought back to America by Spencer Lewis was a system which of course embraced Gnosticism. But I'm not stating that Gnosticism is necessarily all evil, but definitely if we want to, like I explain in volume 9 of my Confessions, in particular, a whole study of how, because Gnosticism as we know it today is not necessarily Gnosticism as we had 2,000 years ago. We start to see the Gnostic schools and even the Gnostic churches coming out of France. But they came out of thin air most of the times without having a real certified lineage. They claimed with a guy called Doniel, who was a guy who went to become a priest, but he was too horny and he couldn't become a Jesuit, so he got to become instead the librarian of the Grand Orient of France, or something like that. But in any case, all these Gnostic lineages that then they all claim, these people in the earlier 20th century, they came from some kind of spiritism, sciences with the Bogomil bishops rather than dictators or some other mythological, legendary, heretic group. But they didn't have some survivors of those schools that will, because if we had to find some survivors of those schools, maybe we could find some leftovers of the Manichaeans or something in the Middle East, but we can't say that we had, because the fathers of the church, like Irenaeus and others, they were very heavy on the Gnostics. They purged the Gnostics out of Christianity, because what happened? Now, the Gnostics, like I explained in volume 9 of my Confessions, were the Illuminati of the time. And they did also some wrong things against Jesus himself, because they wanted to use the popularity of Christianity at one point, mixing it with their own esoteric teachings and occult teachings that backdated Christianity, because Gnosticism goes all the way to Babylon. It goes all the way to the ancient traditions that we find in Persia, as well as in Babylon, which was Iraq. Persia, of course, no, was Iran. And these are the ancient, the legacy of the ancient civilizations that filters in cities like or other important bases for the knowledge that was preserved somehow. When in Europe, unfortunately, we went into the dark time, into a dark era with the fall of the Roman Empire, in which culture wasn't really important or relevant. Hermeticism, the magic of the Renaissance, it all comes after it actually resurfaces thanks to the Iberic Peninsula. They are the ones who took it, but they came from the Iberic Peninsula. In fact, first they took everything they could take from the Moors, from the Jewish, from the Alumbrados, which then were the Illuminati of the time in Spain, were mixing all these teachings, while the Catholic, the infamous Spanish Inquisition was purging the whole of the Iberic Peninsula. But without those teachings that were originally preserved by the Moorish, and so by Islamic people of Islamic culture, who in a way managed to preserve, let's say, the ones who I think most important in this act of preservation are the Sabaeans, not the Sabbateans, the Sabaeans, who are ancient South Arabian people. And the Sabaeans, who are this important religious group mentioned 3 times in the Quran, they manage in a way to, modern scholars have variously identified them as the Mandeans, the Manichaeans, the Sabaeans, Heshkalites, there is all kinds of, but the fact that they managed to preserve not only elements that came from ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, even Buddhist elements, and they preserved elements of the Assyro-Babylonian religion. So today in Iraq, in Iran, the name Sabaean is usually applied to the Mandeans. And we shouldn't forget that this is a very important group because they are the ones who follow the teachings of John the Baptist.
The bulls, yeah, the spell bulls they use.
But link is very important here because remember, they're not following Jesus, they're not following the Ancient Testament, they're following a specific figure, which we know by what we have read in the New Testament was served on the plate. It was served on the plate. So he baptizes Jesus. Okay? Some say he was even linked to the essence. Now, the interesting elements of the essence is that the essence, when we start talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, we should definitely also then focus on the identity of the essence. But in any case, these are monotheistic people, and they manage to preserve, let's say, certain knowledge that you have to understand that when Islam arrived in the Middle East, especially in places like Persia, in places like Babylon, these places are the places that eventually will lead to the birth of Sufism in the Shia tradition before Sufism will eventually be embraced by the Sunnis. It became essential for the Shia, who were a minority, born out of the first schism of the Rashidun Caliphs, because the fourth Rashidun Caliph was Ali, who married the cousin of Muhammad. But then, at that point, Muhammad had died. Ali was one of his greatest warriors. And then all this led to what is known as the Battle of the Camel. And then that led to this schism. But they were a minority. So to preserve this minority, they went in secrecy. At times, let's say that the Sufism became that secret society which started to preserve within Islam elements of different traditions. Because Sufism is not only Islam. Sufism is Islam plus all the other traditions that they were trying to preserve from ancient times.
They're in Russia too. The Sufis, they're in Chechen.
You mean Checheni?
Yeah, Chechnya.
In fact, you're very with that. In fact, now, since yesterday, The Chechens and their special and Kadyrov have offered their militias to go and protect Tehran from the Americans. So they will send their special units, and they are pretty fierce. Because they are Islamic, they were now sent yesterday to Tehran.
And the Eighth Crusades, the Muslims did. Well, honestly, I think the Quran is probably one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. Like, I personally love the Quran, and I think the Islamic faith is pretty fascinating. Like Christianity.
I tell you, it's a book which was actually appreciated very much by the Muslims, though I was very critical of certain things. They actually found it very correct, because all my criticism was moved by a deep knowledge of my own personal knowledge of the Quran, but also of all the studies I conducted in the Middle East personally myself. This is volume 10 of my Confessions. I highly suggest you read this: Islamic, Freemasonry, and the Secret Societies Behind Eternal Conflict in the Middle East. It is a very important book because it explains the origins of the Order of the Assassins within Shia Islam, how the Order of the Assassins became the mercenaries of the Templars because they were fighting Sunni Islam and Saladin, and so they needed assassins who would brutally kill people that officially the church couldn't go and assassin. So then they used the Assassins. But the Assassins came from a schism, which then gave birth also to another incredible religion, the Druze, which are also very important. In the symbolic journey of Christian Rosenkreuz, then you are acquainted with all this. It's symbolic, okay? But everything we have said until now regarding the Iberic Peninsula, the teachings that were maintained there, the fact that then in the Middle East you find certain teachings, that it's all symbolically present in the allegoric, let's say, because I see Christian as an allegory rather than a real person. It can be interpreted simply as CR, Christian is Christ resurrected. It's not like you have to be a genius to understand that. CR or RC, the resurrected Christ. It's pretty understandable under these terms, don't you think?
We agree. We think it's all just symbolism, most of the spiritual texts. And you can get into the Torah. It talks about a lot of symbolism and a lot of trauma, because the Persian immortals were like these giants, and they helped invade what was considered Judea from the tribe of, who was in charge back then? Judah? Yeah. So the immortals invaded, and they were huge people. They were what the Nephilim were. And in Christianity, Jesus performed a lot of magic, and he was trained under John the Baptist.
Let's make a little bit. Let's go back to where we were, and then we can go to Jesus and the magic element, which at times it's a little bit, I think, overestimated, in the sense that when you're talking about Jesus doing magic, it's a little bit like saying Moses did magic. We are talking about another level, which can't be. You see, when Moses astonished the magicians in the Pharaoh court, they were so astonished by what he did that in the end, some of them who were not Jews followed him. And the Erev Rav, which I discussed also in my books, because before the Zabadian Frankis, you have the Erev Rav. And Isaac Luria, the founder of Lurianic Kabbalah, said that in every generation you have 72 reincarnated Erev Rav within Judaism. So that is a statement that was made by him, not by me. This is an exclusive image which I have. Nobody has ever seen this image, but this is the Baphomet of the Knights Templars. Is Mohammed on a cross. It was found in a Templar church in the south of Turkey. It was never showed. It was actually photographed and put, it was given the photo to me by a head of the Sufi Gerai Helveti, who Gabriele Mandelkam is no longer alive. Unfortunately, the late Gabriele Mandelkam was a very good friend of mine. And he published this on the guy, very well known, Gabriele Mandelkam, at a worldwide level, was an authority on Islam. He was, by the way, Jewish also, as well as Muslim. And in Turkey, he was the head of the Girardelli. Now, this photo and the actual cross portrayed in it is very important because they have never had the courage to put this cross with Muhammad on it in a museum, being afraid of the Muslim fundamentalists blowing up the whole place, because it is an heresy. You can't put Muhammad on a cross. You can't even represent Muhammad, let alone put him on a cross. But this represents the beliefs that they had. You see, the Assassins and then converted the temples, some temples, not all temples, to their beliefs. And their belief, Muhammad on a cross, is complete. But the fact that the word Baphomet derives from Muhammad. Then later on you have the Baphomet of Eliphas, but that's a completely different game. And that is the one that was popularized also by Alistair Crowley, who himself signed himself as Baphomet. But if historically we want to be accurate, the actual word Baphomet derives from Muhammad and from this cross that is never been showed publicly, and that for the first time I showed in my book. And
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, no, but the thing is, I actually had a sheikh. You can go on YouTube and find the review of my book by a sheikh who couldn't find an error in my book, because I went through all the surahs and everything with such a methodical level. My wife, when she does the editing of my book, she was like, "Jeez, man, this." When I was writing this book, I was deeply immersed in it, because I knew that you write one thing wrong in Islam, everybody will be at your throat. It wasn't the case. And I was pretty critical of the Sufis, because I depicted all the corruptions within various Sufi orders for the last 1,000 years. So it was pretty harsh on certain Sufi groups to learn about certain things. But in the end, I was correct about what they said. You have to understand, Jalaluddin Rumi, who is reputed this incredible Sufi, I went to his burial ground in the city of Konya in Turkey, but then he got these people and then the disciples, and they are a bunch of thugs. After become thugs in a way, they want to kill each other to preserve certain traditions in a certain way, and then become themselves the leaders, and so it becomes all a war. And that is not only a war of words in that case. It becomes a war of a belief in God, which at times brings to some very despicable actions, unfortunately. Even within the Sufis who are claiming all love, and today the Sufis are portrayed like all love and light, very much embraced by the New Age movement, so on. So people are like, it's not all love and light, let's say, even within Sufism.
Do you believe in Akashic records? Do you believe you can access your Akashic records? Have you ever tried that or done that?
Akashic records, achieving something that they claim exists in this Akashic record. I tell you, I had a lot of important experiences, especially when I conducted the Magic of Abramelin the Mage, which is a very profound grimoire, which ritual lasts for 6 months. And then you are capable eventually of acceding to knowledge which is out of this world. And aside from being able to dominate these demons, though, before you can ascend to the conversation with what Crowley called the Holy Guardian Angel. I think that the problem with the Akashic records is that we have the wrong perception of time. The time is our own creation. Is relative to the god Kronos, Saturn. And so if we put aside time, what are really the Akashic records? Or even the term record, because records, you are recording something.
Yeah.
But if you're living it at the same time, and if you don't have any past, present, and future, then it becomes another thing.
So that's what we believe. We listened to a book called, it was an audiobook from Dolores Cannon. I'm pretty sure you've heard of her. It was conversations with Nostradamus, and she talked about that time is happening at all at the same time.
Everything's happening all at the same time.
Yeah, and she would do astral projection to go to like different periods of time, where she would talk with Nostradamus, and what this book was about astral projection. And she basically said the same thing. There's no Akashic, everything's happening at the same time.
Time isn't real. Time's just, it's everywhere.
I'm in good company. I came to the same conclusion. I didn't know the specific work you cite, but as you see, it is simply proceeding with logic, not necessarily because you want to not believe in analogy, because I am a great believer of analogy before the advent of logic, because the two things. But having said that, as you see, we arrive to the same conclusion. So it is for me very important to understand now where we are in this turning point in history. That for us, that we are living here in the here and now, in the hic et nunc, as the Latins will say, it's definitely a moment of great turmoil, which also definitely will precede the creation of something inevitably new. Because in my work and my research, but also my direct experience with these secret societies, I've always, over and over again, heard about their fascination with artificial intelligence and robotics. And it seems like we are now at that turning point in history where actually artificial intelligence and robotics might annihilate or transform forever humankind, because a lot of these people embrace transhumanism. A lot of the people who have pushed for things like modern Satanism, which of course is very materialistic. People like Anton LaVey were obsessed with the robots or with artificial companions in the future. Of course, he died not knowing that in the year 2026 you will have that possibility. So he was simply mimicking and creating hypotheses, but I think that it's very important to understand that we are risking our own image of God, because we are built in the image of God. But once we start modifying, we are modifying ourselves, so we are inserting external elements, we will lose that. And it will be a big loss. Because today I'm talking to two intelligent gentlemen who have studied, who are well read. But watch the people of your age today who are not capable of reading a book, who scroll maybe one page on the internet and that is already too much for them. And we are going towards total idiocy. And at that point, they will not be able to do the most basic things. So
I agree. I actually said in this reset that we're headed to, go ahead to our global reset, that gold, silver, none of that shit's going to mean anything. The only thing that's going to matter is skills and capabilities. That's going to be the currency. You have to have skills that are transactional. If I'm building a bike and you're a farmer, I'm going to expect more of your harvest for the bike. But if I make bikes and you make horseshoes, that's a fair exchange. It's all about skills and relearning, reskilling, and upskilling yourself and building social capital. And then also the spiritual work as well. There's no such thing as death. Death isn't real. It's what you make of it when you die that is the truth of your reality, your ether, your energy.
Absolutely. No, I think that you are very correct in your assertion, because art and craft is a product of human ingenuity. The moment in which the AI and robotics wants to deliver that, they will always have an approach which is within the algorithm. So it's not open. But we are going towards the rise of cyber Satan. And so we are going towards a moment in which even us as human beings would be surpassed by AI, which in 10 years' time, one AI will be capable of all the faults of mankind in one single computer. Imagine that. And be capable of reasoning and multiplying even the possibility that we have of expanding our knowledge through the AI if we make a correct use of it. Because today, the Jesuits, for example, are saying use the AI, but don't use it to write your essay. Rather use the AI to find the books you need for that essay, to find the material you need for your research. Unfortunately, then you have the majority of kids today say, Here's a damn, I'm just going to get the AI to write the whole thing. I can't be bothered. This is going to take me too long. But the opportunity that we have, imagine, to just go through a whole library in a few milliseconds and get that author or get that subject out of a bunch of others. It's incredible what you can do if you really make a legitimate and, let's say, regular use of the AI. But unfortunately, the temptation is to simply become parasites in this planet that we eat and shit and don't think anymore because the whole thought is the process is delivered to a machine. That is unfortunately what our journey seems to be ending. And then you have, of course, the fact that these big data centers, I explained, I have made 3 books on Cyber Satan, volume 6.66, volume 7, and volume 9, which focuses on quantum computing, which is birth really of techno-feudalism. So we were talking about Peter Thiel, talking about, apart from Peter Thiel's concept on the Antichrist, which is completely eschatologically wrong, and he's like completely siding with Satan himself when he says, oh, AI and robotics will fight the Antichrist. Sure. The AI and robotics will be the Antichrist because they will be ones that Cyber Satan will use to aid the rise of the Antichrist.
Be the Homo Deus, right? You all know Harari talks about Homo.
Of course, but in fact, I have written this book where I discussed the thoughts of Harari, volume 7. It's from the Occult Roots of the reset to the Populist roots of the great reject, because we as populists should reject all this. And now, when you study this book and you understand that we are close to the manifestation of Ahriman, which, of course, for those who know what Ahriman is the manifestation of this demonic force, end times, which is, of course, comes from the Zoroastrian tradition, filters through Rudolf Steiner. And Steiner did some positive things, but Ahriman, which is then is, if you can see it,
Yeah, I can see it.
Going back to people like Steiner and others, I think that the problem is that here within the Western initiatic system, the approach that we have today is the Gnostic approach. And the Gnostic approach is wrong for one reason. Knowledge for an elite, not for everybody.
Yeah.
The truth is that Jesus wanted his knowledge for everybody, so the truth should set us free. Not that the truth becomes like in those, because I was for many years when I was involved in various groups, even in the Gnostic Church in Norway, which at the time was a very interesting experience for me. But it was an elite. There were people who had an elitarian vision of things. We invite only our crowd, we know it better, and we don't throw pearls to the pigs. I can imagine that in certain cases throwing pearls to the pigs, as Jesus himself reminded us, is the wrong thing to do. But it's also the wrong thing to do to think that you and your friends can have an exclusivity on some kind of knowledge and the rest of the people shouldn't see, made able to see that knowledge, to lift that veil, if we want to say it in initiatic terms, the veil of Isis. Lift the veil, but lift it for everybody in the end times. Don't lift it only for certain people.
Yeah, and that makes me think of like Elon Musk's grandfather with Technocracy Inc. and like why Elon's so involved in all this stuff. And Manly P. Hall said, once you understand that esotericism, the veil is lifted. And that makes me think, all of this makes me think of the Orphic hymns. Like, those Orphic hymns tell the story of what life is and what the knowledge of life is through the tales of Orpheus in his songs. But most people have never learned these songs, nor do they know the hymns of Orpheus and what happened throughout that story. And essentially, it's just about creation, that we're here to create and make the world a better place. Through music, through sound, through art, through making love.
And we discussed Christian Rosenkreuz, and legendary figure that eventually appears with the Fama Fraternità, with all the various Rosicrucian manifests which are spread across Europe in the early 17th century. But if we go and study this, Christian Rosenkreuz, his travels through the Middle East, Egypt, Spain, after what I told you today, and we understand how acquiring forbidden knowledge, leading to what he claimed was a spiritual reformation, aimed at healing and scientific advancement, was not really then something that his future students of the Rosicrucians will respect, because 1 century after the Rosicrucian manifestos appeared, the Jesuits were way too eager to infiltrate the whole Rosicrucian agenda, led all their agents left, right, and center, and they actually also had created the basis for what is the Golden Rosicross with Athanasius Kircher, with their early studies on Egypt when we still didn't have the Rosetta Stone, with inviting this important Swedish queen to leave the Protestant faith and to embrace the Catholic faith, and then creating in Rome these circles of initiates. And all this eventually led to a infiltration of maybe something that could have produced something better. The ideas, for example, of an early Rosicrucian mind like Sir Francis Bacon led to some very interesting publications, and that the New Atlantis inspired. It's about understanding that we are traveling and learning through all these various Eastern and Western philosophies that communicate to us things that we need to understand, though, are filled also with dark and wrongful practices that if we pick up and start practicing, like, for example, Isaac Crowley, he went to the dark side. He was like, whoa. He claimed they wanted to work for the Rosicrucians or for the Illuminati, whatever, but he was actually really, he went in the dark side. And I think that even the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt, because they left the esoteric, they wanted to fight the Rosicrucian element that was getting polluted maybe by too much Jesuitry. That's okay. But then they abandoned the esoteric and embraced the idea that they could use the esoteric to then, of course, create a secret society with political aspirations, with aspirations that have nothing to do with perfectioning yourself or with mystery schools tradition, but rather with power and control. And in fact, then after, even if the Illuminati, as the order of the Illuminati lasted very short time, then we have a bunch of other secret societies that come after, inspired by the work of Adam Weishaupt, and they unfortunately were also involved with that dangerous ideology, which is communism, because communism is a dangerous ideology that doesn't respect the kingdom of nature and the rationality of it. And it's a perversion for me. I know that I might seem extreme saying these things, but that's how it is. However, communism itself was experimented by the early Gnostic sects. So here we go back to the fact that early Gnosticism, yes, also before we are at the end of our interview, but the question you made me about Jesus practicing magic, okay. There is certain Gnostic texts that are claimed to be linked to Jesus, which of course are magical in nature. But to imagine Jesus starting a ritual and evoking this or that, or invoking, remember there's always a difference between evoking and invoking, two things to do differently. We say it, of course, for the people who are watching us. It's ridiculous, because the real master acquired this knowledge. Like I remember in the Middle East, one guy who started to talk Aramaic who started to have a lot of knowledge, who started to read every single book of magic, and then what he did, he banned everything by the age of 10 so he could free himself from that burden, and only at that point embrace fully God without his intermediary aspects. So that's what I want to leave you with today. Jesus embraces something more profound because he has knowledge of it, but he doesn't need to start. He doesn't need to go and become the high priest of the temple. The temple actually gets destroyed 70 years after. The temple gets destroyed. The temple is still a matter, a contentious matter to this day, unfortunately. The second temple is destroyed, and unfortunately, they have those who want to rebuild the temple. I don't know, because that is really, that implicates the destruction of the mosques that are, the whole area is holy for all religions. Yeah. So to actually want to have an exclusivity over it would be destroying everything else. In my book here, I explained in a very rational way that Muhammad was already dead when the Muslims arrived in Jerusalem. So the whole concept that, basically flying on some kind of winged creature and arrives on top of what then becomes one of the second most holy shrine in Islam, it's of course created out of thin air, so they could have also add this, let's say, a religious element to a place of great importance. However, over 1,000 years after this happened, the Knights Templars arrived there and they created two bases, one in Gaza and one right there, because it was for them very important area.
Brother, you want to tell them where they can find you about your YouTube channel, your books, and all that good information?
So, yeah, having said that, if we ever see the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the whole show going down, I'm not sure that is going to be good news for anybody. But of course, if they want to, then there is, like I explained, the problem of people using religion for other reasons. It is really, the two things should be separated. In an ideal world, maybe one day we will have the unity of all things. At the moment, to actually say my religion is better than yours is always a matter of conflict. And to even go and destroy, or like the other day for a brief period of time, Cardinal Pizzaballa couldn't go to the Holy Sepulchre. And then we have a missile that arrives nearby. It's a very risky time we are living. We should all pray together this Easter, whatever is your belief system, and try to move forward for humanity with a better situation. And if people want to find my work, they can do it at leozagami.com with all my latest articles, with all the links to my latest books. And I hope that we can hook up in the future for another interesting chat with you, gentlemen.
It'd be a pleasure, brother. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, and it's been a lot of fun. Looking forward to the next one.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Bless you. Take care.
We'd like to give a big thanks to Leo and for everyone tuning in today. We are so grateful for the chance to share our passion and knowledge with you. The world to us, and we excited to bring new content to you that hopefully helps you make sense of the market and maybe even conquer them. This was not a financial podcast. It was an esoteric podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it. We hope you guys are learning from the spirituality aspect of this podcast also, along with markets and all that talk. You can find us on Spotify, on Substack, Apple Podcasts, on Amazon. You can also find us on Amazon.com with the books. We have our Sovereignty of Nations, the Divided States of America, and the Pick of Monte Cristo. Check them out. Leave us a review if you guys like them. Tell us what you guys think about it.
Check out Leo Zagami's work, leozagami.com. He has a YouTube channel. Check that out. check out his books. We're gonna buy some of his books and start listening to them on audiobook as well. So check that out. Support his work. Christian White did some interviews with him. Check that out too. And thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully you learned something. And so